Today's horror story is written by Dark Hero. It's never easy losing someone you love. I lost my dad at a young age, and even now I still think about him. Mom got sick often, so she stayed home in bed. It got worse after my baby sister, Bree, was born. Dad did so much for our small family, all by himself, from helping me with schoolwork, changing diapers, and making sure Mom was taken care of. Despite everything, my dad did his best to take care of all of us. I was 11 years old when our life turned completely upside down. My dad worked as a car salesman at a local lot, so while we were both away, he had hired an older lady named Anna who lived nearby to help take care of my mom and sister. I'd come back from school in the afternoon to relieve Anna of her duty and take care of Bree until Dad came home. Every now and then, Mom would come out of her room and check in on us, but I'd urge her to return to bed. One afternoon, I came home to see Mother rocking Bree in the living room. "Mom, where's Anna?" I asked her as I slowly stepped in her direction. Mom was frail and so skinny you could easily see her bones through her pale skin. Her eyes were a dull, milky blue. Whenever you looked into them, it was as if she was seeing through you rather than at you. Mom slowly turned her head towards me and whispered. Her voice was so soft I had to lean in closer to hear. "Everything is fine. I told Anna to go home." I let out a sigh. Mom wasn't in any condition to be alone for too long, especially with the baby. I walked around the couch to grab Bree from her, but I stepped back when I saw my mom's grip tighten on her. Bree began to stir and whimper in her arms. "Mom, you need to go back to bed. Let me grab her from you," I told her reassuringly. "Dad will be home soon. We're fine." That was when I saw her eyes dart towards me and turn to a sharp glare. "He's not coming home," she said. Her soft voice was so emotionless as she said that, to be honest, it took me aback. "What do you mean?" I asked, but she didn't give me an answer. Mom handed Bree over to me and slowly got up to return to her room upstairs. I stood there confused for a moment. What she had said had worried me, so with Bree squirming in my arms, I stepped towards the kitchen to our landline phone to call Dad at his work. I dialed the number, and after a few rings, he responded.
"What's up, sport?"
His happy voice quickly calmed me down, and I asked when he would be coming home.
"Oh, that's weird.
My dad told me with a bit of worry in his voice.
I'm going to be running a bit late, but not too long.
He reassured me that everything would be okay.
Remember, while I'm gone, you're the man of the house."
I carried on the rest of the afternoon like normal, made sure Mom had taken her medicine, Bree had her milk, and finished my homework. Night had fallen and my dad still wasn't home yet. I wasn't sure what he was doing, but I was sure things were okay. Bree was getting a bit fussy, so I took the initiative to put her to bed. A couple of hours later, she eventually fell asleep, and I rushed to my bedroom to fall asleep, completely exhausted. I'll never forget being woken up in the middle of the night to the sound of the knocking on our front door. The noise echoed throughout the house and caused my baby sister to stir awake, her wails quickly drowning out any other sound. I turned in my bed to try and go back to sleep, but the knocking and crying was incessant. I was sure that Dad would emerge from his bedroom any second to take care of everything as usual. Was he not home yet? I got out of bed as quickly as my drowsy body would allow and staggered toward the front door. I awoke from my daze as I noticed the flashing red and blue lights through the windows. I rushed to the door to be met with a young police officer with a grim look on his face. He spoke to me, but I couldn't hear anything come from his lips. My heart sank, and I turned to see my mom standing beside me, holding my baby sister, with a blank expression plastered on her face. My dad had gotten into a car accident on his way home from work. Apparently, he had begun to swerve and almost hit a semi-truck. He had very narrowly avoided the collision but slammed into a ditch at the side of the road. My dad passed away just a couple hours ago in the hospital. I felt everything start to spin as the officer explained everything to us. His voice, Bree's cries, and my heavy breathing all sounded muffled in my ears. I refused to believe my dad had died up until the day of his funeral. I sat front row among a crowd of friends and families, staring at a glossy, dark brown box containing my dad's body. I could hear the whispers of the other attendees, all of them expressing their concern over my family. Resentment began to fill my heart, but I couldn't allow myself to cave in. The last words my dad told me rang in my head. Remember, while I'm gone, you're the man of the house. A few days after the funeral, after all the people had given us their condolences, we were left there in that home, just the three of us. What was once a jovial and bright home was now filled with an oppressive air of sadness and worry. Dad apparently had left us a good bit of money on top of the life insurance. I was too young to worry about the finances, but I did worry about the state of our household without anyone working. One step at a time, I just had to focus on taking care of my mom and Bree. I finally went back to school. I haven't seen her in a while, but surely Anna would come by and take care of Mom and Bree while I was away. As soon as I hopped off the school bus, I entered my home and was greeted with Bree's cries. I ran upstairs to her room to find her laying on the floor, the curtains pulled tightly over the windows, and my mom standing over her. I rushed to my baby sister's side, scooping her into my arms while the carpet burned my knees. I shushed her until she slowly but surely became at ease. It only took a couple of minutes, and I looked up at my mom. I could barely see her face that was surrounded by her long, blonde hair. One pale blue eye peeked through to stare at me as I shouted to her, "Mom, what's going on?" But she continued to just stand there. I broke the awkward silence to ask where Anna was. Her voice was shaking under her breath. She won't be back," she stuttered. What did she mean? I asked her what she meant, but suddenly her body fell and she was at my eye level. I could hear her mouth slowly open, and I saw through her hair a big, toothy grin. "Mommy is here," she spoke through her teeth. It unsettled me. It didn't sound like my mom at all. The voice that came from my mom was low and deep, almost like a man's voice. I just sat there, frozen, holding Bree while Mom quickly stood up and walked back to her bedroom. I listened to the sound of her footsteps receding, followed by the sound of her door closing. I gasped for air. I didn't realize at that moment I was holding my breath. My hands were shaking and I felt sweat drip down my nose onto my sister. She looked at me with wide eyes and giggled. Maybe I was just overthinking things. I finished the rest of the night with the usual routine of feeding Bree some formula and made myself a big bowl of cereal. After giving Bree a bath, I set her down to play for a bit and went to our phone. Anna's number was written to the side in case of emergencies. I dialed her number and waited for her to respond. Nothing. I waited a moment and called again. Nothing. "Who are you calling?" A deep, gruff voice suddenly came from behind me. I turned to see Mom standing there. "I was just calling Anna to see if she would come and watch you two tomorrow." She reached out and grabbed my hand that was holding the phone and slammed it back into its base. My mom peeked at me through her hair and that deep voice came out again. "No need. Mommy is here." A chill ran down my spine. I stood there like a deer in front of headlights. My mom gripped into my hand tightly and it started to ache a bit. "What's wrong?" "Let go, Mom. It hurts." I told her. My voice was shaking. She kept her hold tightly over my hand. All I could do was stare at her until she finally spoke again with that low voice. "We don't need anyone else." Suddenly, Bree let out a sharp cry and my mom finally let go of me. I ran over to the pack and play where I placed my baby sister. I turned to see my mom go and walk towards the stairs to her bedroom. It was hard for me to fall asleep that night. The sound of that voice kept popping up in my head. I lay there in my bed and stared up at the darkness of the ceiling. I was worried about tomorrow and thought about going to Anna's house to check on her. I whispered to myself to drown out the voice in my head. You're the man of the house. You're the man of the house. I eventually drifted off to sleep. In the morning, I awoke to the sound of Bree giggling from the living room. I went downstairs to find my mom shaking a rattle at her and laughing along with her. I couldn't express to you the shock I was in at what I was seeing. It was like she was normal. I warily made my way to them, and sure enough, it was my mom playing with the baby. I let out a sigh of relief. Maybe Mom was mourning. It was going to take her time to adjust. Oh, hey, honey. She spoke in her usual soft voice. Come here. She slowly outstretched an arm, and I gave her a tight hug. Maybe I was overthinking things. Mom, are you all right? She looked at me with a puzzled look on her face. Of course, honey. I just feel a bit off. Haven't been taking my medicine lately. That made me feel nervous. Dad always made sure she took her medication. Why aren't you taking them? I questioned. We stayed in that embrace for a second longer, and I felt her squeeze tighter. Mommy is all better, I heard a deep voice say. I pushed myself away from her to see my mom still smiling at me. I tried my best not to overthink things again, so I got ready for school and continued my day. The whole day at school, I couldn't help but stress over my mom and the baby. I didn't want to think about living a life without them either. That was the longest day at school I had ever experienced, and I practically flew off the bus as soon as it stopped near my house. When I opened the front door, I looked around to see everything was normal. I say that everything looked normal, but there was an eerie silence that filled the air. It was so quiet I could hear my own blood circulate within my body. The reason this was so odd to me, where's Bree? Where's Mom? I ran around the lower floor, but I didn't see a soul. That was when I noticed something emanating from the kitchen. Wisps of black smoke were slowly pouring into the living room where I was, followed by the smell of something burning. Mom! I shouted as I ran to the kitchen. Smoke was erupting from the oven. My eyes started to burn and I began to cough. I rushed to the oven and turned it off while waving at the thick smoke in front of me. I could barely breathe as the burnt air began to fill my lungs and my vision became blurred from my tears. Then something grabbed my wrist. I looked over to see my mom grabbing hold of me. But it wasn't my mom. She seemed taller, skinnier even, and her hair was much longer. She looked at me with her hair covering her face, a wide smile as she stared at me with empty black eyes. I felt my blood run cold. She looked like my mom, but at the same time much different. When she finally spoke, I felt absolute terror overwhelm me. It was a man's voice that echoed through the kitchen. Boy, I made you dinner. It spoke in a low and guttural tone, a man's voice weathered with age. I shouted at her, asking where my baby sister was. She proceeded to open the oven to release a plume of black smoke. I felt like I wanted to scream, but everything got clogged within my throat. I looked past the darkness into the oven to see a pan holding a large, baby-sized lump of charcoaled meat. My baby sister, not even a year old. The smell that came from that thing was indescribable. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to cry and scream. I felt my body go limp and I collapsed under the floor, but my mom, or whatever this thing that looked vaguely like my mom, held me up by my wrist with ease. What's wrong, honey? You gotta eat. If not, you won't grow big and strong. The man's voice grumbled from my mom's lips. She reached into the oven with her bare hands and clutched the burnt remains with her fingers. I could hear a sickening sizzle come from her skin as she touched the blackened meat. She held her hand out to my face. I could see her hand blister and boil from the meat she was holding. Her hand was only a few inches away from my lips, but I could already feel how hot her hands were. She pressed the lump of meat onto my lips, but I refused to ingest it. I was able to let out a scream as it burned my face. Suddenly, I heard a faint cry from upstairs. A baby's cry. I felt her grip loosen from my wrist as her neck twisted upwards like some kind of beast. I yanked my arm away from her and darted up the stairs. I could hear a low growl echo behind me. The crying got louder as I got up to the upper floor. I followed the noise to the closed door of my parents' bedroom. I opened the door to find Bree, my sweet little sister, laying on her back on the floor. I looked around to see the room was an absolute mess. The bed had nothing on it but deep gashes. The carpet had patches where it looked like she had torn it up. The ceiling fan was completely broken. There were an assortment of pills scattered around the floor, and the white walls had dark brown streaks on them. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, scooping Bree up into my arms. Mom began to slam onto the door. The door shook and cracked with each blow.
Honey!
The man's voice boomed from behind the only thing that separated her from us. I could see the wood dent and break as she continued to bang on the door. Bree began to cry loudly, and all I could do was squeeze her tighter and cry with her. I begged and pleaded for her to leave us alone. That was when a deep laughter erupted, and that voice, that damn voice, called out to me.
Aren't you supposed to be the man of the house?
It said mockingly. Please go away, I yelled through Bree screaming. Then a man's voice called from downstairs.
Hello? We got a call about a fire.
A man called out. My mom, from just beyond the door, let out a low growl. Then I heard her footsteps rush down the stairs like some kind of animal. A man's yell could be heard.
What the fuck?
Then, absolute silence. I sat there in the corner of my bedroom holding Bree in my arms. I couldn't do anything else but sit there in fear as she cried. A few moments later, a knocking could be heard from the door. A soothing man's voice came and they told me they were a police officer. I opened the door to see a young officer, actually the same one that came to see us that night my dad had passed. He saw the state we were in and quickly rushed us out of the house. The rest of the events are a bit hard to explain, but I'll try my best to describe what I can. First off, my mom was never found. The fireman who was downstairs at the time said he saw something rush past him on all fours out of the house. Second, they ended up finding Anna. She was found dead at her home. She had been gone for a long time. They estimated her time of death to be the day my father had died. Bree and I ended up bouncing around between relatives for a while until my uncle from my dad's side was finally able to get a hold of us and take care of things. I'd asked my family if they knew anything about my mom, how sick she was. What was she sick with? Unfortunately, I was left with more questions than answers, but I try not to dwell on it. When I got a bit older, I tried to find her, though I couldn't find a damn thing. Maybe my mom was just really sick. I think there was something much worse. I looked deeply into demonic possessions, but after reading what I found, I kept on remembering that voice. I couldn't do it anymore, so I just left it alone. Oh, and in case you were wondering, it's been years since that happened. We're okay. Bree is fine. She was too young to remember anything that happened, and I'm so glad she doesn't. But every now and then, I'll still remember my mom, my dad, that voice. thank you for listening. You can probably handle another horror story, right?